The black ink splattered across Emma Chun's pristine white sundress like a crime scene photo, each droplet spreading into dark blooms against the cotton fabric. She stood frozen in the center of Lincoln High's main hallway, her arms instinctively wrapping around herself as 3 seniors circled her like predators who just tasted blood. What they didn't know was that the quiet girl they'd been tormenting for months had been preparing for this moment, and her response would leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about power. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Madison Torres held the empty ink bottle in her manicured fingers, a satisfied smirk playing across her lips as she surveyed her handiwork. "Oops," she said with mock concern, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Looks like someone had a little accident with their precious dress." Emma's hands trembled as she looked down at the ruined fabric, the dress her grandmother had sewn for her 16th birthday just 2 weeks ago. Every careful stitch, every delicate detail now destroyed by a moment of calculated cruelty. The hallway buzzed with whispered conversations and phone cameras emerging from pockets, but no one stepped forward to help Dot. It was 11:47 a.m. on a Thursday in October, and Emma had been walking to her chemistry class when Madison and her crew had cornered her near the art department lockers. The ambush had been planned, she realized now, noting how perfectly positioned they were to block any escape route. Madison Torres, captain of the volleyball team and daughter of the town's most successful real estate mogul, had been orchestrating Emma's social destruction since freshman year. "You know what your problem is, Chen?" Madison continued, stepping closer while her friends Brittany Walsh and Chloe Martinez flanked Emma's sides. "You think you're better than everyone else with your perfect grades and your teacher's pet routine. Walking around here like you own the place." Emma had never thought any such thing. If anything, she'd spent 4 years trying to be invisible, keeping her head down, avoiding confrontation at all costs. Her strategy had always been simple: stay quiet, stay small, survive until graduation. But Madison's interpretation of Emma's silence was entirely different. "I don't think that," Emma said softly, her voice barely audible above the hallway noise. "I just want to get to class." Brittany laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the lockers. "Look at her, Maddie. She's about to cry. Just like when we accidentally knocked her books down the stairs last month." The memory stung. Emma had spent her lunch period collecting scattered papers from 3 flights of concrete steps while other students stepped over her supplies like she didn't exist. That incident had cost her a week's worth of notes and a partially completed history project that she'd had to recreate from memory. "Or when we locked her in the equipment shed during pay," Chloe added, pulling out her phone to record. "Remember how long it took maintenance to find her? 3 hours. Emma remembered those 3 hours vividly. She'd missed her advanced placement biology exam and had to convince Mr. Peterson to let her make it up the next day. She'd told him she'd been sick, unable to explain the real reason without facing even worse retaliation. "That was hilarious," Madison agreed, circling Emma slowly like a shark. "But this is going to be even better. You see, Emma, you've been getting away with being weird for way too long. It's time someone taught you how the real world works." The real world, according to Madison Torres, was a place where social hierarchies mattered more than academic achievement, where being different was a crime punishable by humiliation, and where power belonged to those willing to use it against the defenseless. Emma had been studying this ecosystem for years, documenting its patterns in journals she kept hidden in her bedroom. What Madison didn't know was that Emma's apparent passivity masked something else entirely. While her tormentors assumed her quietness came from weakness, Emma had been using those years of observation to understand exactly how bullies operated. She'd read every psychology book in the school library, researched crowd dynamics, studied the way power structures functioned in closed environments. More importantly, she'd been preparing herself physically in ways that none of them could have imagined. "You can't just destroy other people's things," Emma said, finding her voice despite the growing crowd of spectators. "That dress meant something to me." "Meant something?" Madison's eyes lit up with cruel delight. "Past tense. Because now it's ruined, just like everything else about you. Your weird art projects, your perfect test scores, your whole little invisible act. It's all pathetic." The art projects reference hit particularly hard. Emma spent hours after school in the art room, creating intricate drawings and paintings that helped her process the stress of navigating high school's social minefield. Madison had recently convinced the art teacher, Mrs. Richardson, that Emma's work was too dark and concerning, leading to an uncomfortable parent conference that had nearly gotten Emma pulled from her favorite class. "And those test scores?" Brittany chimed in, sensing Emma's vulnerability. "Everyone knows you're probably cheating. No one's that smart without help." This accusation was particularly unfair. Emma's academic excellence came from genuine intellectual curiosity and countless hours of studying, often using schoolwork as an escape from social isolation. Her teachers had noticed her potential early, but rather than protection, her academic success had painted an even larger target on her back. "My grandmother made this dress," Emma said quietly, looking down at the spreading ink stains. "She spent weeks working on it by hand." "Oh, Chloe," cooed mockingly. "Did Grandma make it special for her weird little granddaughter?" "Well, now it matches your personality, dark and messy." The reference to her grandmother struck deeper than anything else they'd said. Emma's Nai had immigrated from Taiwan. As a young woman, working multiple jobs to support her family while learning English at night, the dress represented hours of patient labor, a symbol of love and heritage that had now been destroyed for entertainment. "You know what I think?" Madison pulled out her own phone, joining Chloe in recording. "I think Emma needs to learn some humility. Maybe if she walked around school like this for the rest of the day, she'd understand her place better." The suggestion sent a chill through Emma's body. The ink stains were already drawing stares and whispered comments from passing students. The thought of enduring an entire day as a walking example of Madison's dominance felt overwhelming. "Please," Emma said, hating how small her voice sounded. "Just let me go change clothes." "Change clothes?" Madison laughed. "With what? This is your outfit for the day, Chun. Own it." The crowd around them had grown larger, a mixture of students enjoying the spectacle and others who seemed uncomfortable, but unwilling to intervene. Emma recognized the dynamics at play: diffusion of responsibility, bystander effect, the way social hierarchies paralyzed even well-meaning people when faced with conflict. She also recognized something else in the crowd's positioning, something Madison and her friends hadn't noticed. They were completely focused on their victim, paying no attention to their surroundings or escape routes. Their confidence had made them sloppy, predictable. "You think you're so much better than us," Madison continued, stepping closer until she was inches from Emma's face. "With your college prep classes and your scholarship applications and your perfect little future all planned out. But you know what? Life doesn't work that way for people like you. People like you." The phrase carried weight beyond its surface meaning. Emma was one of only a handful of Asian students at Lincoln High, and Madison's comment carried undertones that had nothing to do with academics or social status. It was a reminder that in Madison's world, Emma would always be an outsider regardless of her achievements. "What's that supposed to mean?" Emma asked, though she already knew. "It means," Brittany said, moving to stand directly behind Emma, "that no matter how hard you try, you'll never really belong here. So why don't you just accept it and stop making everyone else uncomfortable with your trying too hard routine?" The physical positioning was clearly intentional. Madison in front, Brittany behind, Chloe to the side with her phone recording. They'd done this before, Emma realized. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was practiced, refined, perfected through repetition on other victims. "I'm not trying to make anyone uncomfortable," Emma said truthfully. "I just want to finish school and move on with my life." "Move on where?" Chloe interjected. "Some fancy college where you can pretend to be better than everyone else?" Newsflash. "Emma, they don't want you either. You're always going to be that weird girl who thinks she's special." The college reference stung because it was partially true. Emma had been working toward admission to prestigious universities, driven partly by genuine academic passion, but also by a desperate desire to escape Lincoln High's toxic environment. The idea that she might carry this social stigma beyond graduation was terrifying. "Look at her face," Madison observed with satisfaction. "She's finally getting it." "You're nothing special, Emma-chun. You're just a target who's been lucky enough to avoid the worst of what we can do. Until now, the worst of what we can do." The phrase hung in the air like a threat, and Emma felt her carefully constructed emotional defenses beginning to crack. She'd endured months of smaller humiliations, each one chipping away at her confidence and sense of safety. This felt different, more public, more permanent, more designed to destroy rather than simply torment. "But here's the thing," Madison continued, pulling out a second bottle of ink from her backpack. "One ruined dress isn't really enough to make the point. I think we need to be more thorough." Emma's eyes widened as she saw the additional bottle, realizing that the first attack had been just the beginning. Madison had come prepared for total humiliation, and the growing crowd of spectators was only encouraging her to escalate further. "Madison, maybe that's enough," a voice called from the crowd. Emma turned to see David Kim, a junior she knew from the academic competition team, looking uncomfortable but not moving to intervene. "Mind your own business, David," Madison snapped without turning around. "Unless you want to be next." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The threat was enough to silence David and reinforce the crowd's paralysis. Emma felt the familiar despair of social isolation, the understanding that even sympathetic observers would ultimately choose their own safety over helping her. But as Madison raised the second bottle of ink, something shifted in Emma's mind. The months of preparation, the hours spent studying not just academic subjects, but the psychology of bullying, the physical training she'd been pursuing in secret, all of it crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. She thought of her grandmother's patient hands stitching the ruined dress, of her parents' sacrifices to give her opportunities they'd never had, of every small humiliation she'd endured in silence. She thought of David Kim and others like him who wanted to help but were too afraid to act. Most importantly, she thought of every future victim who would suffer if Madison's behavior continued unchecked, every shy student who would walk these halls in fear because no one had ever shown them that bullies could be stopped. Emma's stance shifted almost imperceptibly, her weight moving to the balls of her feet, her center of gravity lowering in a way that would have been recognizable to anyone familiar with martial arts. But Madison, Brittany, and Chloe were too focused on their performance for the cameras to notice. "You know what, Madison?" Emma said, her voice steady for the first time since the confrontation began. "You're right about one thing." Madison paused, ink bottle raised, surprised by the change in Emma's tone. "What's that?" "This is the real world," Emma replied calmly. "And in the real world, actions have consequences." As Madison moved to dump the second bottle of ink, Emma's hand shot out with precision that spoke of years of training, intercepting Madison's wrist and redirecting the motion with a fluid circular movement that sent the bottle flying harmlessly to the side before anyone in the crowd could process what had happened. Emma had pivoted on her left foot, used Madison's own momentum against her, and executed a perfect Aikido throw that sent the volleyball captain tumbling through the air before landing hard on the hallway floor. The silence that followed was absolute. broken only by Madison's groans and the sound of the empty ink bottle rolling across the linoleum. Brittany and Chloe stood frozen, their phones still recording a scene that had suddenly become very different from what they'd planned to capture. Emma stood over Madison's prone form, no longer the victim, but something else entirely, someone who had finally decided that enough was enough. "Like I said," Emma repeated quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, "actions have consequences." The aftermath of Madison's unexpected flight through the air created a vacuum of disbelief that seemed to suspend time itself. Students who had been eagerly recording what they expected to be another routine humiliation now found themselves witnesses to something unprecedented in Lincoln High's social hierarchy. Madison Torres lay sprawled on the cold linoleum floor. Her perfectly styled blonde hair splayed around her head like a broken crown. The girl who had ruled the school's social ecosystem through fear and manipulation was now staring up at the fluorescent lights with a mixture of shock and confusion that bordered on the comedy. "What the hell just happened?" Brittany Walsh whispered, her phone still recording but her hand trembling slightly. The question hung in the air like smoke, because what had happened defied every social rule that governed their world. Emma Chun stood exactly where she had been moments before, but everything about her had changed. The hunched shoulders and downcast eyes that had defined her for 4 years were gone, replaced by a centered stance and calm confidence that seemed to radiate from her core. The ink-stained dress still clung to her frame, but somehow it no longer looked like a mark of shame. "Emma?" David Kim's voice cut through the silence, barely audible but heavy with disbelief. "How did you?" "7 years," Emma said quietly, her eyes never leaving Madison's prone form. "I've been training for 7 years. The revelation hit the crowd like a physical force. 7 years meant Emma had started when she was 9 years old, long before she'd ever set foot in Lincoln High, long before Madison Torres had ever learned her name. This wasn't a lucky move or a moment of desperate inspiration. This was a preparation. Meeting opportunity. Chloe Martinez took an involuntary step backward, her recording device capturing her own retreat. "You're some kind of martial arts freak?" she asked, though her voice lacked its earlier venom. "Aikido," Emma corrected, extending a hand toward Madison, who was still struggling to orient herself. "It's a defensive art focused on redirecting aggression rather than meeting it with violence." Madison slapped Emma's hand away and scrambled to her feet, her face flushed with humiliation and rage. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Using some karate nonsense to sucker punch me?" "No punches," Emma replied calmly. "I used your own momentum against you. That's the principle of Aikido, harmony through redirecting force. You attacked, I simply guided your energy in a different direction." The distinction was lost on Madison, but several students in the crowd were beginning to understand the implications. Emma hadn't fought back in the traditional sense, she had transformed Madison's aggression into Madison's downfall, using nothing but physics and precise technique. "This is assault," Madison shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger at Emma while smoothing down her disheveled hair. "I'm calling the police. I'm pressing charges. My mother will sue this school into the ground." "Actually," came a new voice from the edge of the crowd, "I'd be very interested to hear that conversation." Everyone turned to see Mrs. Patricia Rodriguez, Lincoln High's head of security, pushing through the gathered students with her phone in hand. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were fixed on the scene with the intensity of someone who had been watching from a distance. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Madison immediately shifted into victim mode, tears appearing as if summoned on command. "Emma attacked me. She threw me to the ground for no reason. I want her arrested." Mrs. Rodriguez held up her phone, its screen showing a video that had clearly captured the entire incident from beginning to end. "I've been recording since the first bottle of ink was thrown," she said evenly. "Would you like to revise your statement, Miss Torres?" The color drained from Madison's face as the implications sank in. Mrs. Rodriguez had evidence of the ink attack. The threats, the intimidation, everything that had led to Emma's defensive response. She had no right to put her hands on me. Madison insisted, though her voice had lost much of its conviction. She had every right to defend herself, Mrs. Rodriguez replied. What I witnessed was a clear case of assault, the ink throwing, followed by threats of further assault. Miss Chun's response appears to have been proportional self-defense. Brittany and Chloe exchanged worried glances, suddenly realizing that their phones contained evidence of their own participation in what was now being classified as assault. The footage they had intended to use for social media humiliation had become documentation of their criminal behavior. "This is ridiculous," Brittany protested. "It was just a prank. We were just having fun." "Fun?" Emma spoke for the first time since offering Madison help up, and her voice carried a steel that none of them had ever heard before. "Destroying someone's property, threatening them, attempting to humiliate them in front of dozens of people. That's your definition of fun?" "Emma," David Kim stepped forward, his earlier paralysis replaced by curiosity. "Where did you learn to do that? I mean, the Aikido thing?" Emma glanced at him, then at the crowd of faces surrounding her, some hostile, some fascinated, all completely focused on her for the first time in her high school career. The irony wasn't lost on her that it had taken a physical confrontation to make her classmates actually see her as a person. "My grandfather," she said simply. "He started teaching me when I was 9 after ... She paused, considering how much to reveal. "After some kids at my elementary school decided I was an easy target." The admission sent ripples through the crowd. Many of them had assumed Emma's quiet nature was simply her personality, not recognizing it as a survival strategy developed in response to years of bullying. "So you've been planning this?" Madison accused, seizing on what she perceived as admission of premeditation. "You've been waiting for a chance to attack me?" "No," Emma shook her head. "I've been hoping I'd never have to use it. Aikido isn't about attacking. It's about neutralizing attacks. I spent 4 years trying to avoid this exact situation." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped closer to the group, her presence causing several students to unconsciously back away. "Miss Torres, Miss Walsh, Miss Martinez, I need you to come with me to the principal's office. We have several violations to discuss. This is harassment." Madison's desperation was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. "You're persecuting me because you want to protect your little teacher's pet. I'm following school policy." "Regarding assault and harassment," Mrs. Rodriguez replied calmly, "the video evidence is quite clear about who initiated what." As the 3 girls were led away, Madison threw one final venomous look over her shoulder. "This isn't over, Emma Chun. You have no idea what you've started." "Yes, I do," Emma called back, her voice carrying clearly down the hallway. "I've started defending myself. I should have done it 3 years ago." The crowd began to disperse as the immediate drama concluded, but many students lingered, their perception of Emma fundamentally altered. Conversations buzzed with speculation, disbelief, and a growing sense that something significant had shifted in their school's social ecosystem. "Emma," a quiet voice spoke from behind her. She turned to find Sarah Williams, a sophomore she barely knew, standing with obvious nervous energy. "That was incredible. Could you teach me to do that?" Before Emma could answer, another voice joined in. "Me too," said Marcus Thompson, a junior who had been one of Madison's frequent targets. "I mean, if you don't mind." Then another student spoke up, and another. Within minutes, Emma found herself surrounded by classmates who had never spoken to her before, not out of curiosity about a spectacle, but with genuine requests for help. "I don't know," Emma said honestly. "I mean, it takes years to learn properly, and it's not really about fighting. It's more about balance, mental discipline, understanding how force works. Could you at least show us the basics?" Sarah persisted. Just how to not feel helpless when someone bigger tries to intimidate you. Emma looked around at the eager faces surrounding her and realized something profound had happened. For years, she had been isolated by her differences, marked as an outsider by her quiet nature and academic focus. But her moment of self-defense had revealed something that resonated with many of her classmates, the desire to feel empowered rather than victimized. The first thing you need to understand, Emma began, then paused as she noticed more students gathering to listen. The first thing is that Aikido isn't about being stronger or faster than your opponent. It's about being centered, balanced, and aware of your surroundings. She demonstrated a basic stance, showing how shifting her weight and positioning made her more stable and harder to push around. The students watched intently, several of them mimicking her movements. The throw I used on Madison works because it redirects her forward momentum downward and to the side, Emma explained, moving slowly through the motion. She was already off balance because she was focused on attacking rather than maintaining her center. So you could teach someone to do that even if they're not particularly strong? Asked Jessica Lee, a freshman who looked like she weighed maybe 90 pounds soaking wet. Size and strength matter less in Aikido than in other martial arts, Emma confirmed. It's more about timing, positioning, and using physics to your advantage. A smaller person can definitely use these techniques against someone larger. The group had grown to nearly 20 students, an unprecedented social gathering for Emma, who usually ate lunch alone. She felt a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation at this sudden attention, unsure whether it represented genuine interest or merely curiosity about the day's drama. Would you really consider teaching us? David Kim asked. I mean formally? Maybe we could start a club or something. Emma's eyebrows rose in surprise. A martial arts club at Lincoln High would be entirely new, and the idea of leading it was both thrilling and terrifying. She had spent so many years trying to remain invisible that the prospect of deliberately putting herself in a leadership position felt surreal. I'd have to ask my grandfather, she said slowly. And we'd need faculty approval, and probably insurance waivers, and… She trailed off, realizing she was already thinking practically about how such a thing might work. What's your grandfather like? Sarah asked with genuine curiosity. Emma smiled, the first completely natural expression she'd worn all day. He's 82 years old and can still throw me across a room if I'm not paying attention. He grew up in Taiwan but learned Aikido from a Japanese master who moved to Taipei in the 1960s. He says the art chose him, not the other way around. That sounds like something from a movie, Marcus laughed. Real martial arts aren't much like movies, Emma explained. It's mostly repetitive practice, learning to fall properly, and developing mental discipline. The physical techniques are actually the smallest part of it. But they work, Jessica pointed out. I mean, Madison's still probably seeing stars. They work when you need them to, Emma agreed. But the goal is to never need them. Conflict resolution, awareness, de-escalation, those are more important than any throwing technique. The conversation continued for several more minutes before the warning bell for next period broke up the gathering. As students began to disperse toward their classes, Emma found herself standing alone in the hallway for the first time since the incident began. She looked down at her ink-stained dress, the physical evidence of Madison's attack now seeming less like a badge of shame and more like proof of her own transformation. The quiet girl who had walked into school that morning no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone who refused to accept victimization as inevitable. But as Emma headed toward her chemistry class, she couldn't shake the feeling that Madison's parting words carried real weight. This isn't over. Emma had won the first confrontation, but she had also escalated a conflict that had previously been limited to psychological warfare. The real question was what would happen next, and whether her years of training had prepared her for the kind of retaliation that someone like Madison Torres might devise when her entire social identity had been challenged in front of the whole school. As she walked, Emma noticed something different in how other students looked at her, not with pity or dismissal, but with a mixture of respect and curiosity that she had never experienced before. Whatever came next, she would face it as someone who had proven that even the quietest voice could make itself heard when it needed to. The revolution had begun with a single throw, but Emma suspected it was just the opening move in a much larger game. By the time Emma reached her chemistry class, the entire school was buzzing with rumors that grew more outlandish with each retelling. She had apparently single-handedly defeated 5 seniors, performed supernatural feats of strength, and possibly possessed secret ninja training from a mysterious Asian monastery. The truth was simultaneously more mundane and more remarkable than any of the stories spreading through the halls. Mr. Patterson looked up as Emma entered his classroom, his expression unreadable. As one of Lincoln High's most respected teachers, he had undoubtedly heard multiple versions of the hallway incident within the past 20 minutes. "Miss Chun," he said quietly, "I trust everything is all right?" Emma nodded, acutely aware that every student in the room had turned to stare at her. The ink stains on her white dress served as visible confirmation that something significant had occurred, though the exact details remained a mystery to most of her classmates. "I'm fine, Mr. Patterson. Thank you for asking." She took her usual seat in the front row, but the familiar isolation felt different now. Instead of being ignored, she could feel the weight of curious gazes and hushed conversations happening behind her back. The attention was unsettling in its novelty, but not entirely unwelcome. "Before we begin today's lesson on molecular bonding," Mr. Patterson announced, "I want to remind everyone that chemistry is fundamentally about balance. When elements interact, they seek stability through equal and opposite forces. Disruption of this balance can lead to explosive reactions, but understanding these principles allows us to predict and control outcomes." Emma recognized the subtle message in his words. Mr. Patterson had a reputation for using scientific concepts to address real-world situations, and his timing wasn't coincidental. As the lesson progressed, Emma found herself thinking about balance in ways that extended far beyond molecular chemistry. For 4 years, she had maintained a delicate equilibrium at Lincoln High by remaining small, quiet, and unobtrusive. Madison's attack had disrupted that balance, and Emma's response had created an entirely new chemical reaction in the school's social ecosystem. The question was whether this new configuration would prove stable or explosive. Her phone buzzed quietly with a text message. Emma glanced down to see an unknown number with a simple message: "Meet me after school, parking lot. Come alone." Madison Torres was apparently not content to let the morning's humiliation stand as the final word in their conflict. Emma deleted the message but felt her stomach tighten with anticipation and concern. A confrontation in the parking lot suggested Madison was planning something that couldn't happen under the watchful eyes of school security. Another text arrived 5 minutes later, this one from a number she recognized as belonging to David Kim. "Heard about Madison's message. Don't go alone. Several of us want to help." Emma stared at the screen in surprise. She hadn't mentioned Madison's text to anyone, which meant either David had supernatural intuition or Madison was being less subtle about her intentions than she realized. A third message appeared almost immediately. "She's been texting half the school, planning something big. Be careful. Sarah." The realization that Madison was organizing some kind of group confrontation sent a chill down Emma's spine. The morning's one-on-one encounter had been manageable precisely because Aikido was designed to handle single attackers. Multiple opponents presented an entirely different challenge, one that her grandfather had warned her about repeatedly. "Miss Chun?" Mr. Patterson's voice cut through her worried thoughts. "Would you care to share your thoughts on the stability of ionic compounds?" Emma looked up to find the entire class watching her expectantly. She had been so absorbed in the text messages that she had missed the question entirely. "I'm sorry, Mr. Patterson. Could you repeat the question?" "I was asking about the factors that determine whether an ionic compound will remain stable or break." Apart under stress. The parallel to her current situation was so obvious that Emma wondered if Mr. Patterson was deliberately offering guidance through chemistry metaphors. Ionic compounds remain stable when the attractive forces between opposite charges are stronger than any disruptive forces acting on the system, she answered carefully. But if external pressure exceeds the binding energy, the compound will dissociate. Excellent. And what happens when a stable compound is suddenly exposed to a highly reactive environment? Emma met his gaze, understanding that they were no longer discussing chemistry. It depends on the nature of the compound. Some will break down under pressure, but others will form new, stronger bonds that make them more resilient than before. Mr. Patterson nodded approvingly. The key is understanding your own composition and the forces you're dealing with. Sometimes the most stable configuration isn't the most obvious one. As class ended and students filed out, Mr. Patterson gestured for Emma to stay behind. When they were alone, he closed the door and turned to face her with an expression of genuine concern. "Emma, I've been teaching here for 15 years, and I've seen this pattern before. What happened this morning is going to have consequences that extend far beyond a single hallway confrontation." "I know," Emma replied quietly. "Madison's already planning something for after school. And you're considering meeting her?" Emma hesitated. The honest answer was that she felt obligated to face whatever Madison had planned, partly out of pride and partly from a sense that running away would only delay the inevitable. "I don't think I have much choice. If I don't show up, she just find another time and place. At least this way, I can prepare." Mr. Patterson leaned against his desk, studying her thoughtfully. "You know, when I was your age, I was convinced that every conflict had to be resolved through direct confrontation. It took me years to understand that sometimes the smartest strategy is to change the rules of engagement entirely." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Madison Torres operates according to a very specific set of assumptions about power, social dynamics, and consequences. She's planning an after-school confrontation because she believes she can control the narrative and the fair outcome in that environment." Emma nodded slowly, beginning to understand his point. "But what if you refuse to play by her rules? What if instead of meeting her in some isolated parking lot, you turned this into something public, documented, and impossible for her to manipulate?" The suggestion was intriguing, but Emma wasn't sure how to implement it practically. "What would that look like?" Mr. Patterson pulled out his phone and showed her a social media app that Emma rarely used. "It looks like this," he said, displaying a screen full of videos and comments related to the morning's incident. Emma's eyes widened as she scrolled through dozens of posts, each showing different angles and perspectives of her encounter with Madison. The footage was surprisingly clear, and the comments ranged from supportive to amazed to skeptical. "I had no idea people were recording so extensively," she murmured. "Everything is recorded now, Emma. The question is whether you're going to let other people control how your story gets told." He showed her several more posts, including one from Madison herself that portrayed the incident as an unprovoked attack by an unstable student with dangerous martial arts training. The post had already garnered dozens of supportive comments from Madison's followers. "She's trying to reframe the narrative," Emma observed. "Exactly. And she's doing it in the court of public opinion because she knows she can't win in any official forum. The security footage and witness statements make it clear that she was the aggressor." Emma studied the screen more carefully, noting the usernames and profile pictures of students commenting on various posts. Many names she recognized as Madison's usual crowd, but others were unfamiliar or belonged to students she had never expected to take any interest in her situation. "There are a lot more people paying attention to this than I realized," she said. That's both an opportunity and a danger, Mr. Patterson warned. Social media can amplify your voice, but it can also amplify any mistakes you make. If you decide to use these platforms, you need to be strategic about it. Emma's phone buzzed again with another message from Madison. Don't think you can hide behind teachers forever. 3:30. Be there or everyone will know you're a coward. The threat was clearly designed to manipulate Emma into compliance, but reading it in the context of Mr. Patterson's advice gave her a different perspective on the situation. What if I made this confrontation public from the beginning? Emma asked slowly. What if instead of sneaking around to meet her in some parking lot, I announced exactly what she's planning and invited everyone to witness it? Mr. Patterson smiled. Now you're thinking like a strategist instead of a victim. Emma spent the next few minutes crafting a social media post that laid out the facts clearly and calmly. She described Madison's text messages, the planned after-school confrontation, and her own intention to face whatever was coming with full transparency. I'm not hiding from anyone, she wrote. If Madison Torres wants to continue this conflict, she can do it in front of the entire school community. Let everyone see who's really interested in resolution versus who's interested in revenge. She tagged several of the students who had expressed interest in learning self-defense, including David Kim and Sarah Williams, and added a final line. Anyone who wants to understand what happened this morning is welcome to come see how this plays out. The post went live at 2:15 p.m., and within minutes it had been shared dozens of times. Emma watched the engagement numbers climb with a mixture of excitement and terror, realizing that she had just transformed a private confrontation into a very public spectacle. By 2:30, her phone was buzzing constantly with responses, friend requests, and messages of support from students she barely knew. The simple act of refusing to be intimidated into secrecy had shifted the entire dynamic of the conflict. At 2:45, a new post appeared from Madison, clearly written in response to Emma's transparency strategy. Some people will do anything for attention, it read. See you at 3:30. Don't bring your fan club. But the damage to Madison's position was already done. Emma's willingness to make the confrontation public had exposed Madison's preference for operating in shadows and isolation. The parking lot meeting that was supposed to be Madison's carefully controlled revenge scenario had become a public accountability moment. As the final bell rang and students began making their way toward the parking lot, Emma felt a strange calm settling over her. She had spent the entire day reacting to Madison's provocations, but now she was proactively shaping the encounter on her own terms. Mr. Patterson appeared beside her as she gathered her things. Remember, he said quietly, you've already won the most important battle. You refuse to let her define you as a victim. Whatever happens next, you're facing it as someone who chose their own response. Emma nodded, shouldering her backpack and walking toward what would likely be the most public moment of her high school career. Behind her, she could hear the footsteps of other students heading in the same direction, drawn by curiosity, solidarity, or simple desire to witness whatever was about to unfold. The parking lot confrontation that Madison had envisioned as a private opportunity for revenge was about to become something entirely different. A very public test of whether Lincoln High's social ecosystem was ready for the kind of change that Emma Chun represented. As she pushed through the doors leading outside, Emma caught sight of Madison standing near the center of the parking lot, flanked by at least 8 other students. The numbers were worse than Emma had expected, but the presence of dozens of witnesses recording everything on their phones had fundamentally altered the nature of the encounter. Whatever happened next, it would happen in full view of the entire school community, with no possibility of manipulation or distortion. Emma had successfully transformed Madison's ambush into a moment of public accountability. The question now was whether her Aikido training had prepared her for what was coming, and whether the student body of Lincoln High was ready to witness The final collapse of a bullying system that had operated in darkness for far too long. The Lincoln High parking lot had never hosted anything quite like the scene that unfolded at 3:30 p.m. on that October Thursday. What should have been a typical afternoon dismissal had transformed into something resembling a medieval trial by combat, complete with a crowd of spectators forming a loose circle around the designated combat zone. Emma emerged from the school building to find nearly 100 students already gathered, their phones raised like digital torches in the fading daylight. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation and nervous energy, as if everyone present understood. They were witnessing a pivotal moment in their school's social history. Madison Torres stood at the center of the crowd, no longer the confident predator from the morning's hallway encounter. Her carefully constructed image of effortless superiority had been replaced by something harder and more desperate. The 8 students flanking her represented the core of her social power structure, mostly athletes and children of wealthy families who had never faced serious consequences for their actions. "Well, well," Madison called out as Emma approached, her voice carrying easily across the parking lot. "Look who decided to show up after all." And she brought her own documentary crew. The comment drew scattered laughter from Madison's supporters. But Emma noticed that the majority of the crowd remained silent, watching with the intense focus of people who understood they were witnessing something significant. "I kept my word," Emma replied calmly, her voice steadier than she felt. "The question is whether you're still interested in resolving this, now that everyone can see what's really happening." Madison's jaw tightened at the implicit challenge. The public nature of the confrontation had clearly disrupted whatever scenario she had envisioned, but backing down now would represent a catastrophic loss of face in front of her followers. "Oh, I'm very interested in resolving this," Madison said, taking a step forward. "You embarrassed me in front of the whole school this morning. You think some karate nonsense makes you special, but you're about to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong people." Emma's eyes swept across Madison's assembled supporters, noting their positioning and body language. Most looked uncomfortable with the public attention, clearly preferring the shadows where their usual intimidation tactics operated. A few, however, seemed eager for whatever was about to unfold. "This doesn't have to involve anyone else," Emma said, directing her words toward Madison's supporters as much as Madison herself. "Whatever grievances you have with me, we can settle them without dragging other people into it." "Actually," said Tyler Brooks, Madison's boyfriend and co-captain of the football team, "I think we all have grievances with you now. You made Maddie look like a fool this morning, and that reflects on all of us." Tyler's intervention changed the dynamic significantly. Where Madison's anger was personal and emotional, Tyler's involvement suggested a more calculated response from the school's athletic elite. Emma realized she was no longer facing just one bully's wounded pride, but a coordinated attempt to reassert the existing power structure. "How does it reflect on you?" Emma asked, genuinely curious about his reasoning. "Because we don't let people disrespect our friends," Tyler replied, cracking his knuckles in what was clearly meant to be an intimidating gesture. "And we especially don't let weird little outsiders think they can change the way things work around here." The phrase "weird little outsiders" hung in the air like a challenge, loaded with implications that extended far beyond the immediate conflict. Emma felt the crowd's attention sharpen, recognizing that Tyler had just made this about more than personal grudges. "So this is about keeping people in their place?" Emma asked, her voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. "This is about respect," Madison interjected, reclaiming control of the narrative. "You clearly don't understand how things work at this school, so we're going to teach you." Emma noticed several adults gathering at the edges of the crowd, teachers who had stayed late, parents picking up children from after-school activities, even a few community members drawn by the unusual commotion. The presence of adult witnesses added another layer of complexity to the situation. "Mrs. Rodriguez is coming," someone in the crowd called out, And Emma turned to see the security head, pushing through the assembled students with 2 uniformed police officers beside her. Madison's expression shifted from confident aggression to barely concealed panic. The arrival of law enforcement meant that whatever she had planned would now occur under official scrutiny, with potential legal consequences for any actions taken. "What's going on here?" Mrs. Rodriguez called out as she reached the center of the circle. "This looks like an organized fight which violates about 6 different school policies and several state laws." "No fight," Tyler said quickly, his earlier bravado evaporating. "Just students talking things out." One of the police officers, a middle-aged woman with sergeant's stripes, surveyed the scene with professional skepticism. "Looks like more than talking to me. We've had several calls about a potential riot at the high school. This is Emma Chun," Mrs. Rodriguez explained to the officers, "the student from this morning's incident. And this is Madison Torres, one of the students currently facing disciplinary action for assault." The revelation that Madison was already in official trouble sent murmurs through the crowd. Many students had assumed the morning's incident would be handled informally, without real consequences for anyone involved. "Miss Torres," the sergeant addressed Madison directly, "are you aware that you're currently under investigation for assault and harassment, and that organizing any kind of retaliation could result in additional charges?" Madison's face went pale as the legal implications of her situation became clear. What she had envisioned as a social media redemption arc was now being framed as potential criminal activity. "I wasn't retaliating," Madison said defensively. "I just wanted to clear the air with Emma, talk things through like adults." "With 8 backup dancers?" the sergeant asked dryly, gesturing toward Madison's assembled supporters. "In a parking lot, away from school supervision? That's an interesting definition of adult conversation." Emma watched the confrontation unfold with a mixture of relief and disappointment. The arrival of law enforcement had effectively neutralized Madison's ability to escalate the situation physically, but it had also robbed Emma of the opportunity to demonstrate that she could handle whatever Madison had planned. "Officers," Emma said, stepping forward, "I appreciate you being here, but I'd like to know what Madison actually wanted to say to me. If we're going to resolve this, maybe we should hear what she has to say." The sergeant looked surprised by Emma's request. "Miss Chun, you understand that you have no obligation to engage with someone who's already assaulted you once today?" "I understand," Emma replied. "But I also understand that running away from problems doesn't make them disappear. If Madison has something to say, I'd rather hear it now in front of everyone than wonder what she's planning next." Madison looked trapped between her desire to save face and her growing awareness of the legal jeopardy she faced. The public setting that Emma had insisted upon was now working in Emma's favor, forcing Madison to either articulate her grievances clearly or back down entirely. "Fine," Madison said finally. "You want to know what this is about? It's about the fact that you came to this school thinking you could just keep your head down and avoid everyone, and then when someone finally called you out, you suddenly turned into some kind of ninja warrior. It's fake, it's manipulative, and it's making everyone else look bad." The accusation was so absurd that several people in the crowd laughed audibly. Emma felt a moment of genuine confusion about how to respond to such a fundamental misunderstanding of both her motivations and her actions. "Madison," Emma said slowly, "I never wanted to fight you. I spent 4 years trying to avoid exactly this situation. I learned Aikido because I was tired of being afraid, not because I was planning to attack people." "But you did attack me," Madison insisted, "in front of everyone. You made me look like an idiot." "No," Emma corrected firmly. "You made yourself look like an idiot by dumping ink on my dress and threatening me in front of dozens of witnesses. I just defended myself." The distinction seemed lost on Madison, but Emma could see understanding dawning on the faces of many spectators. The crowd was beginning to recognize that Madison's version of events bore little resemblance to what they had witnessed or heard about. "The real issue," Tyler interjected, clearly trying to redirect the conversation, "is that Emma's encouraging other kids to think they can fight back against people who are just trying to maintain order in the school." "Order?" David Kim's voice cut through the crowd as he pushed forward to stand beside Emma. "You call dumping ink on someone's dress maintaining order? Stay out of this, Kim," Tyler warned. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does," said Sarah Williams, appearing on Emma's other side. "It concerns all of us. Because what happened to Emma this morning could happen to any of us tomorrow." More students began stepping forward, forming a loose line of support. Behind Emma, the symbolic gesture was powerful, a visual representation of the fact that Madison's attempt to isolate and intimidate Emma had instead galvanized opposition to the entire system of bullying she represented. "This is ridiculous," Madison said, her voice rising with frustration. "You're all making this into some kind of civil rights movement when it's just about one weird girl who can't take a joke." "A joke?" Emma's voice carried a steel edge that made everyone in the crowd fall silent. "Destroying my grandmother's handmade dress was a joke? Threatening to humiliate me for the rest of the school day was a joke? Planning this parking lot ambush with 8 of your friends was a joke?" For the first time since the confrontation began, Madison had no immediate response. The cumulative weight of her actions, laid out clearly and publicly, exposed the cruelty and calculation behind what she had tried to dismiss as harmless pranking. "Maybe," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger, "the real joke is that you've spent so many years convincing yourself that tormenting other people makes you powerful, when all it really makes you is pathetic." The words hit Madison like a physical blow. In front of her peers, her teachers, and law enforcement, she was being called out, not just for her actions, but for the fundamental weakness that drove them. "You don't know anything about me," Madison said desperately. "You don't know what it's like to have expectations, to have people depending on you to maintain standards." "I know what it's like to be afraid," Emma replied quietly. "And I know what it's like to choose between staying afraid and doing something about it. The difference is that I chose to learn how to protect myself instead of learning how to hurt other people." The sergeant stepped forward, sensing that the confrontation had reached its natural conclusion. "All right, everyone. Show's over. Miss Torres, you and your friends are coming with us for a conversation about making threats and organizing potential violence. Miss Chen, do you need medical attention or counseling services?" "I'm fine," Emma said, "but thank you for asking." As the police began separating Madison's group from the rest of the crowd, Emma found herself surrounded by classmates offering congratulations, support, and questions about Aikido training. The girl who had started the day as a social invisible had become the center of a movement she never intended to create. But as the crowd dispersed and the immediate drama concluded, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this public victory was only the beginning of a much larger transformation. Madison Torres might be facing legal consequences, but the system that had enabled her behavior for years remained largely intact. The real test would be whether this moment of accountability could create lasting change, or whether it would simply be another brief disruption in Lincoln High's long tradition of protecting bullies at the expense of their victims. As Emma walked toward her grandfather's car, where he sat waiting with an expression of quiet pride, she realized that her journey from victim to victor was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The ride home with her grandfather was unlike any conversation Emma had ever experienced with him. Master Chen Wei sat in contemplative silence for the first 10 minutes, his weathered hands steady on the steering wheel as he processed what he had witnessed in the school parking lot. "You chose the right moment," he finally said in Mandarin, his voice carrying the weight of 7 decades of experience. "But more importantly, you chose the right principles." Emma looked at her grandfather's profile, noting the subtle pride in his expression. Throughout her years of training, he had emphasized that Aikido was not about winning fights, but about creating harmony through proper action. Today was her first real test of those teachings. I was scared, she admitted, also, switching to Mandarin for the intimacy it provided. When I saw how many people Madison had brought, I thought I might have made a terrible mistake. Fear is wisdom when it teaches caution, Master Chun replied. But you did not let fear choose your actions. You chose your actions and then faced the fear they brought. That is the difference between a victim and a warrior. As they pulled into their driveway, Emma noticed several missed calls on her phone from local news stations. The video footage from the parking lot had apparently spread beyond Lincoln High's social media ecosystem and caught the attention of professional journalists. "Grandfather," Emma said as they sat in the parked car, "I think this is going to get bigger than just school drama." Master Chun nodded thoughtfully. When you throw a stone into still water, the ripples spread in all directions. You cannot control where they go, only the intention behind the throw. That evening, Emma discovered just how prophetic her grandfather's words were. The story had been picked up by 3 local television stations, 2 newspapers, and several online publications focused on education and youth issues. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, friend requests from strangers, and messages of support from people across the country who had seen the footage. But the most meaningful message came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Henderson, the art teacher who had been forced to leave Lincoln High 3 years earlier after her own encounter with the school's toxic culture. "Emma," the email read, "I saw the news coverage of what happened today. I want you to know that you accomplished something I never had the courage to attempt. You stood up not just for yourself, but for every student who has ever felt powerless. In that school, I'm proud of you and I'm inspired by you. If you're willing, I'd like to tell you about some things that happened during my time at Lincoln that might help you understand the larger picture of what you're fighting against." Emma stared at the message for several minutes, realizing that her actions had somehow given permission for other victims to speak up about their experiences. The ripple effect was already extending beyond her immediate situation. Meanwhile, across town in the Torres family mansion, a very different conversation was taking place. Madison sat in her father's mahogany-paneled office, facing the kind of parental fury that money and influence couldn't shield her from. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Richard Torres paced behind his massive desk, his face flushed with a combination of anger and panic. "The footage is everywhere, Madison. Everywhere. I've had 3 business partners call me today asking why my daughter is all over social media, assaulting another student." Madison's mother, Patricia Torres, sat rigidly in a leather chair, her perfectly manicured hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white. As the president of the Lincoln Heights Country Club and chair of multiple charity boards, she understood better than anyone how quickly social reputation could crumble. "It wasn't an assault," Madison protested weakly. "It was just a prank that got out of hand." Emma completely overreacted. "A prank?" Richard's voice rose to a near shout. "You destroyed another student's property, threatened her with further humiliation, and then organized what amounts to a ganged intimidation session in the school parking lot. In what universe is that a prank?" The legal implications were what truly terrified Richard Torres. As a real estate developer who depended on city contracts and community goodwill, he couldn't afford to have his family associated with criminal behavior. The optics were devastating. A wealthy white student attacks a poor Asian immigrant's granddaughter while filming it for social media entertainment. "Your mother and I have spent 20 years building our reputation in this community," Richard continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And you've managed to destroy it in one afternoon with your childish cruelty." Madison had never seen her father this angry. Throughout her life, his money and connections had solved every problem she encountered. Teachers who complained about her behavior were transferred or convinced to change their assessments. Students who challenged her social dominance, found themselves facing various forms of institutional pressure until they backed down or left the school entirely. But Emma Chun represented something new, an opponent who couldn't be bought, transferred, or intimidated into submission. Worse, Emma had turned Madison's own weapons against her by making everything public and documented. "What are we going to do?" Madison asked, for the first time in her life genuinely afraid of consequences she couldn't escape. "We are going to hire the best attorney we can find." Patricia Torres spoke for the first time, her voice cold as winter. "And you are going to publicly apologize to that girl and anyone else you've been tormenting. And you're going to mean it, because your future depends on people believing you've genuinely changed." The prospect of public humiliation made Madison's stomach clench with terror. Her entire identity was built on being the one who humiliated others, not the one who apologized for doing so. Back at Lincoln High, Principal Robert Matthews was facing his own crisis. The school board had called an emergency meeting for Friday morning, and Matthews knew his job was on the line. The viral footage had exposed not just student misbehavior, but systematic administrative failure to protect vulnerable students. Matthews sat in his darkened office at 9 p.m., scrolling through hundreds of social media posts about the incident. The comments revealed a pattern of ignored complaints, dismissed concerns, and protected bullies that painted a damning picture of his leadership. A knock on his door interrupted his brooding. Mrs. Rodriguez entered without waiting for permission, her expression grim. "We have a problem," she announced, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Mrs. Henderson's attorney called. She's prepared to testify about the harassment she experienced here, and she has documentation we thought was destroyed." Matthews felt his blood pressure spike. The Henderson situation from 3 years ago was supposed to have been quietly resolved with a settlement and non-disclosure agreement. If she was willing to break her silence, it would open a floodgate of scrutiny that could destroy multiple careers. "What kind of documentation?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Video recordings, email chains, witness statements. Apparently she was more thorough than we realized, and it gets worse. 3 other former female faculty members have contacted her attorney, expressing interest in sharing their own experiences." The revelation hit Matthews like a physical blow. His attempts to protect the school's reputation by quietly removing problematic victims, instead of addressing problematic behavior, had created a paper trail that could now be used against him. "There's more," Mrs. Rodriguez continued relentlessly. "I've been reviewing our incident reports from the past 5 years. The pattern is undeniable. Dozens of complaints about the same group of students, all minimized or dismissed. Emma Chun's incident today wasn't an isolated event. It was the culmination of a systematic failure." Matthews realized that Emma Chun had unknowingly triggered something much larger than a simple bullying incident. She had become the catalyst for exposing years of institutional corruption and negligence. Meanwhile, at the Chun family's modest home, Emma was experiencing her own form of overwhelm. Her phone had crashed twice from the volume of incoming messages, and news vans had been parked outside since dinner time. "I don't understand why this is such a big story," Emma said to her parents over a late dinner. "Kids stand up to bullies every day." Her father, Dr. James Chun, looked up from his tablet where he had been reading news coverage. "Because most kids don't have the training to defend themselves effectively, and most schools don't have video documentation of the entire incident from multiple angles. You've become a symbol." "A symbol of what?" "Of the possibility that victims don't have to stay victims," her mother, Dr. Lisa Cheen, replied gently. "Of the idea that bullies can face real consequences for their actions. Of hope for parents who worry about their children's safety at school." Emma's parents had immigrated from Taiwan when she was 5 years old, both carrying PhD degrees that weren't initially recognized in the United States. They had spent years rebuilding their careers while instilling in Emma the values of education. hard work, and quiet perseverance. Her grandfather's Aikido training had been their compromise between protecting their daughter and maintaining their belief in nonviolent conflict resolution. The principal from Lincoln called. Dr. Chun continued. He wants to meet with us tomorrow to discuss moving forward constructively. I suspect he's more interested in damage control than actual change. Emma's phone buzzed with another news alert. The story had now been picked up by national media, with headlines like Teens' Martial Arts Skills, Stop School Bullying, and Viral Video Shows, Student Fighting Back Against Harassment. This is getting out of control, Emma murmured, reading through increasingly sensationalized accounts of the day's events. Master Chun, who had been quietly eating throughout the conversation, finally spoke. Control was never the goal, little one. Justice was the goal. Sometimes justice requires more attention than we're comfortable with. As if summoned by his words, Emma's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Emma? This is Rebecca Martinez from Channel 7 News. I'm sorry to call so late, but we're preparing a segment about your story for tomorrow morning's broadcast. Would you be willing to share your perspective on what happened today? Emma looked around. The table at her family, all of whom were watching her with expressions of support mixed with concern. The decision she made in the next few moments would determine whether she remained a private person who had defended herself, or became a public figure in a larger conversation about bullying and school safety. I'll talk to you, Emma said finally. But only if you're interested in the whole story, not just the dramatic parts. Of course, Rebecca replied eagerly. Can we schedule an interview for tomorrow morning? And would your parents be willing to participate as well? As Emma arranged the details, she realized that her quiet life at Lincoln High was definitively over. Whether she wanted it or not, she had become the face of a movement that was much larger than one girl's decision to defend herself. The question now was whether she was ready for the responsibility that came with that role, and whether the changes her actions had set in motion would ultimately benefit the students who needed protection most. Outside her window, the news vans continued their vigil, their satellite dishes reaching toward the night sky like mechanical flowers seeking signals. From across the country, the ripple effect was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, and Emma Chun found herself at the center of a storm she never could have imagined when she woke up that morning. That Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that usually made Emma feel optimistic about the day ahead. Instead, she found herself staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, preparing for a television interview that would broadcast her story to hundreds of thousands of viewers across 3 states. The interview set up in her family's living room looked surreal, professional lighting equipment, casting harsh shadows across furniture that had been rearranged to accommodate cameras and sound equipment. Rebecca Martinez from Channel 7 sat across from Emma, her practiced smile warm but her eyes sharp with journalistic intent. We're living 30 seconds, the cameraman announced, and Emma felt her grandfather's hand briefly touch her shoulder. In support. Good morning, I'm Rebecca Martinez with Channel 7 News. Yesterday, a confrontation at Lincoln High School became a viral sensation when 16-year-old Emma Chun used martial arts training to defend herself against a group of bullies. Emma joins us now with her family to share her side of this remarkable story. Rebecca turned to Emma with professional warmth. Emma, let's start with yesterday morning. Can you walk us through what happened when Madison Torres and her friends cornered you? Emma had rehearsed this moment in her mind, but speaking the words aloud felt different. Madison had been targeting me for harassment throughout the school year, but yesterday she escalated to physical assault by destroying my clothing and threatening further humiliation. When she moved to attack me again, I used Aikido techniques my grandfather taught me to defend myself. Your grandfather is Master Chen Wei, a respected martial arts instructor in our community, Rebecca continued, glancing toward the elderly man sitting beside Emma's parents. Master Chun, When you started training Emma 7 years ago, did you expect she would ever need to use these skills? Master Chun's weathered face remained impassive as he considered his response. Aikido is not about expecting violence, but about being prepared for it while hoping it never comes. Emma's training was always about building confidence and discipline, not about fighting. But the training worked, Rebecca pressed. The footage shows Emma successfully defending herself against someone significantly larger. Was this outcome what you intended? The outcome I intended, Master Chun replied carefully, was raising a granddaughter who would never accept being victimized. Yesterday, Emma chose not to be a victim. That choice is more important than any physical technique. Rebecca shifted her attention back to Emma. Emma, social media is calling you a hero, but some critics are saying you escalated the situation unnecessarily. How do you respond to that? Emma had expected this question and had discussed her response with her parents. I don't think defending yourself when someone attacks you is escalation. Madison threw ink on my dress, threatened me with further attacks, and tried to corner me with multiple people. I used the minimum force necessary to stop her from hurting me. Let's talk about what happened after that initial incident, Rebecca continued. You made a decision to make your afternoon confrontation with Madison public rather than meeting her privately. Why? Because bullies rely on isolation and secrecy, Emma explained, feeling more confident as she articulated ideas she had been developing over the past day. They choose victims they think won't fight back in situations where there won't be witnesses or consequences. By making everything public, I took away their ability to control the narrative. Rebecca nodded approvingly. And that strategy seems to have worked. We've learned that Madison Torres and several of her associates are now facing criminal charges, and that Lincoln High School is under investigation by the State Education Department. Did you anticipate these consequences? I hoped for accountability, Emma replied honestly. But I didn't realize how many other people had been hurt by the same system that allowed Madison to target me. This was true in ways that even Emma was still discovering. Throughout Thursday evening and Friday morning, her family had been contacted by former Lincoln High students, current students from other schools, and even adults who had experienced similar harassment in their own educational journeys. Each story revealed patterns of institutional failure that extended far beyond one school or one bully. Dr. Chun, Rebecca addressed Emma's parents. How do you feel about your daughter becoming the center of a national conversation about bullying and school safety? Emma's father adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. We're proud of Emma for standing up for herself, but we're also concerned about the pressure this attention creates. She's still a teenager who just wanted to finish high school peacefully. At the same time, Emma's mother added, if her experience helps other families feel empowered to demand better protection for their children, then we believe the attention serves a positive purpose. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, sensing an opportunity for deeper insight. Emma, you've received hundreds of messages from students across the country who say your story has inspired them. Do you feel ready for that kind of responsibility? Emma paused, considering the weight of the question. Over the past 18 hours, she had read messages from students who had been suffering in silence, parents who had felt helpless to protect their children, and even teachers who had been afraid to intervene in bullying situations. I don't know if anyone is ever ready for that kind of responsibility, Emma said slowly. But I know that staying silent wasn't helping anyone, including myself. If speaking up encouraged other people to speak up, then maybe we can change things for the better. Speaking of change, Rebecca transitioned smoothly. We understand that Lincoln High School's principal, Robert Matthews, announced his resignation this morning. The school board has also called for a comprehensive review of anti-bullying policies and procedures. What would you like to see happen next? Emma had discussed this question extensively with her family, particularly her grandfather, who had emphasized the importance of focusing on principles rather than personalities. I want Students to feel safe at school, Emma said simply. I want teachers to have the tools and support they need to protect students. And I want bullies to understand that their actions will have real consequences. It's not about punishing specific people. It's about creating a culture where harassment isn't tolerated. Master Chun, Rebecca turned back to Emma's grandfather. You've spent decades teaching martial arts. In your experience, what's the most important lesson we can learn from Emma's story? Master Chun's response carried the weight of cultural wisdom passed down through generations. The most important lesson is that power without discipline becomes cruelty, but discipline without courage becomes submission. Emma found the balance between these extremes. She had the courage to act and the discipline to act correctly. The interview concluded and the television crew began packing their equipment. Emma felt both exhausted and energized. The conversation had helped her articulate ideas that had been forming in her mind since Thursday morning. But it had also made her realize how much work lay ahead. Her phone buzzed with a text from David Kim. Watch the interview. You're officially famous now. Also, about 50 kids have asked me for your contact info about Aikido lessons. The message made Emma smile, remembering the students who had expressed interest in learning self-defense techniques. What had started as personal preparation for potential danger had somehow become the foundation for a community movement. Another message appeared, this one from an unknown number. Emma, this is Sarah Williams' mom. I wanted to thank you for inspiring my daughter to speak up about her own experiences with bullying. Because of your example, she finally told us about incidents that have been happening since middle school. We're meeting with the school district Monday morning to discuss policy changes. Your courage gave my family the courage to act. Reading messages like this one made Emma understand why her grandfather had emphasized the ripple effect of principled action. Every person who felt empowered to speak up created space for others to do the same, generating expanding circles of accountability and change. Meanwhile, across town at Lincoln High School, an entirely different kind of reckoning was taking place. The emergency school board meeting had drawn a packed audience of parents, students, teachers, and community members who demanded answers about years of ignored complaints and dismissed concerns. Board President Margaret Foster gavelled the meeting to order with obvious reluctance. The past 24 hours had brought her more angry phone calls and emails than she had received in her previous 5 years of service combined. Before we begin, she announced, I want to acknowledge that this board has received hundreds of communications from community members expressing concern about bullying and harassment at Lincoln High School. We take these concerns seriously and are committed to implementing necessary changes. The carefully diplomatic language was immediately challenged by Teresa Rodriguez, a parent who had driven up from the state capitol specifically for this meeting. With respect, Mrs. Foster, taking concerns seriously and implementing changes are two very different things, she said, standing to address the board directly. My daughter graduated from Lincoln High 3 years ago, and the harassment she experienced there contributed to anxiety and depression that she's still dealing with in college. The patterns we're seeing in this week's incident are exactly the same patterns that were ignored when she was a student. Her statement opened floodgates. Parent after parent stood to share stories of children who had been bullied, teachers who had dismissed complaints, and administrators who had prioritized protecting the school's reputation over protecting students. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the district superintendent, found herself taking notes on patterns of abuse that painted a devastating picture of institutional failure. The Emma Chun incident hadn't created these problems. It had simply made them impossible to ignore any longer. What specific changes are you prepared to implement immediately? Demanded Robert Kim, David's father and a local attorney who had been researching the district's legal vulnerabilities. We're forming a comprehensive review committee, Dr. Walsh replied, that will examine all policies related to student safety and bullying prevention. We'll also be conducting sensitivity training for all staff and implementing new reporting procedures. That's not good enough, called out Maria Santos, whose son had been one of Tyler Brooks' frequent targets. We need immediate action, not more committees and training sessions. We need accountability for the people who let this situation get so bad. The meeting continued for over 3 hours, with board members struggling to maintain control as community anger reached a boiling point. By the time it concluded, they had committed to specific reforms, including mandatory reporting requirements, independent investigation procedures, and regular community oversight meetings. Back at the Chun household, Emma was processing her own emotions about the day's developments. The television interview had gone well, but the attention felt overwhelming for someone who had spent 4 years trying to remain invisible. "Grandfather," she said as they sat together in his small meditation garden, "do you think I did the right thing?" Master Chun was quiet for several minutes, watching the evening light fade across his carefully tended plants. "You have asked the wrong question, little one." "What's the right question?" "The right question is whether you acted according to your principles when the moment demanded action. Everything else, the consequences, the attention, the changes that follow, those things are beyond your control." Emma nodded, understanding the wisdom in his distinction. She had defended herself when attacked, spoken truthfully when questioned, and chosen transparency over secrecy. The massive consequences that followed weren't her responsibility to control, only to navigate with the same principles that had guided her initial decisions. Her phone buzzed one final time before she went to bed. The message was from Madison. "Torres, I'm sorry." Emma stared at the 2-word apology for a long time, recognizing it as the first honest communication she had ever received from her former tormentor. She decided not to respond immediately, wanting to consider whether forgiveness was something she was ready to offer or whether Madison had even earned the right to ask for it. As she prepared for bed, Emma realized that despite all the attention and pressure, she felt more at peace than she had in years. For the first time since starting high school, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The girl who had once hidden from conflict was now ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the knowledge that she could defend herself, and the understanding that standing up for principles sometimes required accepting consequences beyond her control. The transformation was complete. But the story was far from over. 3 months later, Emma Chun stood in the renovated Lincoln High Gymnasium, watching 23 students of all ages and backgrounds practice basic Aikido movements under her grandfather's patient instruction. What had begun as informal conversations about self-defense had evolved into the school district's first official martial arts program, funded by a combination of community donations and guilt-driven school board appropriations. "Remember, Master," Chun called out in his accented English, moving between students to correct their posture. "Aikido is not about being stronger than your opponent. It is about being more centered, more balanced, more aware of the forces at play." Emma smiled as she watched 12-year-old Jessica Park successfully redirect an attack from David Kim, who had become one of the program's most dedicated students. The sight of a 7th grader confidently handling a technique that had once seemed impossibly complex filled Emma with the same satisfaction her grandfather must have felt watching her own progression years earlier. "Miss Chun," called out Marcus Thompson, who was partnered with Sarah Williams for partner practice, "could you show us that wrist escape technique again? The one you used in the hallway?" Emma demonstrated the movement slowly, breaking down each component for the gathered students. The technique that had seemed instinctive in the moment of crisis now served as a teaching tool, its practical application making abstract concepts concrete for new practitioners. "The key," Emma explained, "is not to fight against the grip, but to understand the weakest point of your opponent's hold and move in a direction they can't resist." As the class concluded and students began filtering out of the gymnasium, Emma reflected on the extraordinary changes that had transformed not just her own life, but the entire culture of Lincoln High School over the past 3 months. Principal Matthew's resignation had been followed by the hiring of Dr. Angela Rivera, a former high school counselor who specialized in restorative justice and community-based conflict resolution. Her first major initiative had been the implementation of peer mediation programs and mandatory empathy training for all students and staff. The changes went far beyond policy adjustments. The school's social ecosystem had been fundamentally altered by the public nature of Emma's confrontation with Madison and the subsequent community outcry. Students who had previously felt powerless to challenge harmful behavior now understood that speaking up could lead to real change. Emma, Dr. Rivera approached as the last students left the gymnasium. I wanted to thank you again for agreeing to help launch this program. The feedback from students and parents has been overwhelmingly positive. Thank you for making it possible, Emma replied. I never imagined that defending myself would lead to something like this, Dr. Rivera smiled. Sometimes the most important changes come from the most unexpected places. Your grandfather mentioned that you're considering continuing martial arts instruction beyond high school? Emma nodded. Over the past month, she had received inquiries from 3 other school districts interested in implementing similar programs, along with invitations to speak at education conferences about student empowerment and anti-bullying strategies. I'm thinking about studying education in college, Emma admitted. Maybe specializing in conflict resolution or social psychology. I want to understand how to create environments where students feel safe to learn and grow. That sounds like an excellent path, Dr. Rivera agreed. You've already proven that you have the courage and wisdom to create positive change. Imagine what you could accomplish with formal training. As Dr. Rivera left, Emma began helping her grandfather pack up the equipment they had brought for the day's lesson. The routine had become comforting, a shared activity that connected her present circumstances to the years of private training that had prepared her for this moment. Grandfather, Emma said as they worked, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't fought back that day? Master Chun paused in his packing to consider the question. I wonder about many things, little one. But I have learned that wisdom lies not in imagining different choices, but in understanding the consequences of the choices we actually made. And what do you think the consequences have been? For you? You have learned that you are stronger than you believed and that your actions can influence the world in ways you never expected. For others, they have learned that change is possible when someone has the courage to refuse unacceptable situations. Emma finished folding the training mats, thinking about the various ways her life had changed since that October morning. The attention had been overwhelming at first, but it had also connected her with a community of people dedicated to protecting vulnerable students and creating safer educational environments. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca Martinez. Emma, I know it's been a few months since our interview, but I'd love to do a follow-up story about the Aikido program and the other changes at Lincoln. Are you interested? Emma showed the message to her grandfather, who shrugged. The choice is yours. You understand now that speaking publicly carries both opportunities and responsibilities. I think I'll do it, Emma decided. People should know that real change is possible, not just dramatic confrontations. As they loaded the equipment into Master Chen's car, Emma noticed a figure approaching across the parking lot. She recognized Madison Torres immediately, though the confident swagger that had once defined her movement was noticeably absent. Emma, Madison called out hesitantly. Could I talk to you for a minute? Emma glanced at her grandfather, who nodded encouragingly. I'll wait in the car, he said quietly. Madison looked different than she had 3 months earlier. The designer, clothes and perfect makeup remained, but something fundamental had shifted in her demeanor. She carried herself with less arrogance and more uncertainty, as if she was no longer sure of her place in the world. "I wanted to thank you," Madison said, the words clearly difficult for her to speak. Emma's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Thank me? For not letting me get away with it," Madison explained. "For forcing me to face consequences for the first time in my life. I know that sounds crazy, but the past 3 months have been the worst and best thing that ever happened to me." "How so?" Madison took a deep breath before continuing. "The worst. Because I had to admit to myself and everyone else that I was a terrible person who hurt people for entertainment. The best because I finally had to start dealing with why I was doing those things." Emma waited silently, sensing that Madison needed to work through whatever she was trying to say. "I've been seeing a therapist," Madison continued. "Court-ordered at first, but I'm continuing on my own now. She's helped me understand that I was bullying other people because I felt so powerless in my own life. My parents, my friends, everyone had expectations that I could never meet. So I took out my frustration on people who seemed even more powerless than me." "That doesn't excuse what you did," Emma said carefully. "No, it doesn't," Madison agreed immediately. "But it helps explain it, and understanding it helps me change it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't think I deserve that yet. I just wanted you to know that your refusal to be a victim saved me from becoming something even worse than I already was." Emma studied Madison's face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but finding only what appeared to be genuine remorse and self-reflection. "What are you doing now?" Emma asked. "Community service mostly. 300 hours at a domestic violence shelter and another 200 at an anti-bullying organization downtown. I'm also speaking to middle school students about the consequences of harassment behavior." The image of Madison Torres warning younger students about the dangers of bullying was so incongruous with Emma's memories that she almost smiled. "Are you planning to return to Lincoln?" Emma asked. Madison shook her head. "My parents transferred me to Riverside Academy. Smaller classes, more structure, better supervision. Probably better for everyone that I finish high school somewhere else." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Two teenagers who had been locked in conflict just months earlier, now trying to understand how their lives had become so intertwined. "Emma," Madison said finally, "I know this is asking a lot, but would you be willing to speak at one of the sessions where I talk to middle school students? I think hearing from someone who successfully stood up to a bully would be more powerful than just hearing from the bully herself." Emma considered the request carefully. The idea of appearing alongside Madison felt strange, but the potential impact on young students facing similar challenges was compelling. "I'll think about it," Emma said honestly. "But only if you're genuinely committed to preventing other people from experiencing what you put me through." "I am," Madison replied with conviction. "I understand if you don't believe me yet, but I'm committed to spending as much time undoing harm as I spent creating it." As Madison walked away, Emma felt a complex mixture of emotions. The anger and fear that had defined her relationship with Madison were fading, replaced by something closer to cautious hope that people could genuinely change when forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Master Chun rolled down his window as Emma approached the car. "How do you feel about that conversation?" he asked. "Confused," Emma admitted, "but also hopeful, I think." She seemed different. "People can change when they choose to do the work required for change," Master Chun observed. "The question is whether they choose temporary improvement to avoid consequences or genuine transformation that lasts beyond external pressure. How do you tell the difference?" "Time," Master Chun replied simply, "and consistent actions that align with stated intentions." As they drove home, Emma's phone buzzed with messages from various members of the Aikido program. Sarah Williams was excited about successfully de-escalating a confrontation with some 8th grade boys who had been bothering her younger sister. David Kim wanted to discuss plans for expanding the program to include conflict resolution workshops for parents and teachers. Most meaningfully, Emma had received a message from Mrs. Henderson, the former art teacher whose experiences had helped Emma understand the broader context of institutional failure at Lincoln High. Emma, the message read, I saw the news coverage of the martial arts program you've started. I wanted you to know that I'm returning to teaching next year at a different school district, one that has implemented many of the policy changes your advocacy helped inspire. Thank you for having the courage I couldn't find. You've made it possible for people like me to try again. Reading messages like this one reminded Emma why the attention and responsibility she had never sought were ultimately worthwhile. Her grandfather had been right about the ripple effect individual acts of principled courage created, expanding circles of positive change that reached far beyond their immediate circumstances. As they pulled into their driveway, Emma noticed a package waiting on the front porch. The return address showed it was from a textile art studio in Taiwan. Inside, she found a carefully wrapped bundle containing a new white dress, clearly handmade, with the same attention to detail and love that had gone into her grandmother's original creation. A note in Chinese characters accompanied the package. From your Nai Nai, Master Chun translated, reading over Emma's shoulder. She says, for new beginnings that honor old wisdom. Emma held up the dress, admiring the intricate embroidery and perfect stitching. Like her grandmother's original creation, it represented hours of patient labor and generations of cultural knowledge. Unlike the original, it also represented something new, a gift celebrating not just heritage, but the courage to defend that heritage when it was threatened. Will you wear it to the spring conference where you're speaking? Master Chun asked, referring to the State Education Symposium, where Emma had been invited to present her perspectives on student empowerment and institutional change. Yes, Emma decided. It feels right to honor where I came from while talking about where we're going. As she carefully hung the dress in her closet, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her from invisible victim to visible advocate in just a few months. The transformation hadn't been easy. The attention was still sometimes overwhelming, and the responsibility felt heavier than she had expected. But as she looked at the dozens of messages from students who felt empowered to speak up, parents who felt heard by school administrators, and teachers who felt supported in protecting vulnerable students, Emma understood that her grandfather had been right about the relationship between personal principles and social change. The girl who had once hidden from conflict was now actively seeking opportunities to prevent others from experiencing the fear and isolation she had endured. The Aikido training that had prepared her to defend herself had become the foundation for teaching others to defend themselves. Most importantly, the community that had once seemed indifferent to student suffering was now actively engaged in creating safer, more supportive educational environments. Standing in her bedroom, surrounded by college applications and speaking invitations, Emma realized that her story was no longer about a single moment of self-defense. It had become something larger, a demonstration that individual courage could catalyze systemic change, and that the quietest voices sometimes carried the most important messages. The white dress hanging in her closet represented both an ending and a beginning. The ending of accepting victimization as inevitable, and the beginning of a lifetime dedicated to ensuring that other students would never have to make the choice between safety and silence. Emma Chun had found her voice, and she was just getting started using it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.